Hello, good afternoon, and I suppose good evening. In addition, I'm Bob McConnell, co-founder of the U.S. Ukraine Foundation. We're waiting for Congresswoman Kaptur to sign on. A little housekeeping. If you haven't been part of the program earlier in the day, at the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side, there is a globe, and you can click on that and choose the language you want to hear the program in, English or Ukrainian.
There, how's that?
Well, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Put my glasses on so I can see you. There you are.
Here I am. Well, for our audience, I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker this afternoon, Marcy Kaptur, member of Congress representing Ohio's 9th Congressional District. Marcy was first elected to Congress in 1983 and has served in the House of Representatives longer than any other woman, all the time serving diligently, and I have this from constituents, serving diligently her constituents back home in Ohio and the nation's interests here at Washington. She's a senior member of the critical House Committee on Appropriations, including being the chair of the Energy, Water Development, and Related Agencies Subcommittee, and importantly here, a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Also important here, as I'm sure our audience knows, Marcy is and has been for a very long time co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. Marcy, today we've had 3 different panels and a very vibrant discussion about U.S.-Ukraine relations and regional security in the context of today's Russia-provoked aggression. We also had a panel on the Crimean platform, which I certainly found very interesting. We're all most anxious to hear from you and your perceptions from Capitol Hill. So, Marcy, the mic is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Bob. And what an honor it is to join you and all of those who are listening from the U.S. Ukraine Foundation. And I think it's an understatement to say how much I respect you and Nadia McConnell for your persevering work, tireless work on behalf of liberty, not just in our country, but in aspiring nations like Ukraine. And to all of those who are listening, thank you. Thank you for caring and understanding enough about history to know why this effort in trying to extend the umbrella of liberty to Ukraine is so vitally important. I just have a few comments, and I don't know if there will be questions, but we'll leave time for that. Like you, I want to thank Nicholas Kazvini-Gore on my own staff for the fine work that he does. And he's actually here in the room listening as we proceed today. First, I want to say just a word about Russian aggression in Ukraine. Aggression by Russia and the former Soviet Union is nothing new. For many decades and decades, Russia has had an expansionist mentality to take territory and hold territory. So we all recognize what a critical time this is for transatlantic security. Russia has significantly increased its hybrid warfare on NATO's eastern flank, and no one knows that better than those who are listening this afternoon. We have seen the number of troops increase to well over 100,000. And now we are watching Russia as she carries out joint exercises with Belarus and literally with the dawn of the migration that has been moved to the border and then moved back from the border between Belarus and Poland, using human beings as projectiles into making an attempt to move into Western Europe and Central Europe. The Russian government has been very intent on opening up another potential front for aggression. And for the moment, that's sort of pushed back, but I think it could pop up at any time again. The Biden administration has publicly warned that Russia may have plans to invade Ukraine in the coming weeks and months and put the world on alert that they're paying very close attention. So they've not been silent. But meanwhile, we watch as Russia exacerbates the energy crisis in Europe, with costs increasing sometimes as much as 600%. And then over the weekend, we saw the story about the launch of, according to the Russian government, the testing of their hypersonic missile. So always saber rattling, always trying to create dissension, discord, testing the edges of liberty in Europe. I believe that they are testing NATO, and they are testing the Biden administration, and obviously they're testing the Congress. Recall that the Kremlin allied with the Assad regime in Syria by barrel bombing civilian centers, which helped to increase and destabilize flows of migrants across Europe. I don't think that was accidental at all. I think that was all planned. And if you recall back to some history, during 1934's Great Terror in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin ordered the deportation of 50,000 Poles, Finns, and many others to Kazakhstan to consolidate his power along the border with the West. And then we all have read about the Anders Army and what happened during the Second World War with the march across the Middle East into the Battle of Monte Cassino. So Russia is very adept and has experience in moving vast numbers of people across the continent, many times for very ill purposes, I'm sad to say. Now, congressionally, what are we doing? Well, you've seen the Senate tied up over the imposition of sanctions on those who are constructing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And of course, that passed the House unanimously. And now the Senate has had to deal with it full square. And we hopefully over the next couple of days have some resolution there. But I think the House, on a bipartisan basis, made our feelings felt very, very strongly. And we thank all of you who have helped us to do that across this great country. The Congress itself, certainly the House, stands shoulder to shoulder with our allies in Central and Eastern Europe. And we have voted consistently to increase security assistance to Ukraine now 2 years in a row to counter Russian aggression. But those numbers have been going up on an annual basis. I'm proud to say the House took the lead in that. And additionally, the House voted unanimously, as I mentioned, to fully sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the Kremlin's main malign influence project in the region. I have to say this, and I've talked to the Ukrainian leaders about this in our own government. We must do more to help Ukraine become energy independent through increased research and the development of biofuel systems. They certainly have the capability to do that, but not much experience. On the nuclear front, we can do a whole lot. And with hydrogen, blue hydrogen, including that produced from nuclear, I think we have a great opportunity to synchronize the electric grid across Europe and to work with the Ukrainians to achieve that. It's difficult with the pressures that are on them, but we need to be thinking about the exchanges we're involved in, making sure that energy is on the list, whether you're meeting with agriculturalists, take companies in our country or hook them up through Zooms that are developing biofuels. And Ukraine has such potential in that area alone. Agriculture is her most positive balance of payments, if you look at the Ukrainian accounts. In addition to that, the development of various types of nuclear technologies that are more reliable, and the production of hydrogen, and obviously, you know, what we can do on the renewables front and on electricity as well, electric vehicles and so forth. So I think part of our job is to help her make progress on those fronts, as well as to increase, and already so many Americans are working on this, but we can always use more help for support for Ukraine's veterans, for a rule of law and an independent judiciary. And one of my favorite causes, which is extremely hard to accomplish, and that is attention to the rural women of Ukraine who are producing the majority of food being eaten in that country. We need to think harder about how to link there, including in the occupied areas, making sure there's enough seed, making sure there are enough tools. This is not rocket science. This is just humanitarian efforts that can help across that vast complicated region. So I look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the Biden administration and our NATO allies to counter Russia's aggression and ensure the hope for a prosperous and free Ukraine. Thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. And again, just thank you, everyone, for what you have done.
Well, thank you, Marcy. One thing I'd like to ask is, do you have any prediction about when the appropriations bills for defense and state might get through?
Well, in the Senate right now, we're backlogged. I'm not in the Senate, so I can't speak for them, but they are pretty much tied up on the defense bill right now, one that cleared here several days ago, weeks ago. And but the sticking point really has to do with the provision that deals with sanctions on those involved in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Your provision.
Yes, it's our, yes.
Do you have, I mean,
Congressman McCall, myself, and many, many others.
well, it seems like the administration is really putting pressure on to try and get that out.
Yes.
We're monitoring it, and we've got members of the Friends of Ukraine Network who have spoken up and had their 2 cents, into Senate offices and so forth about it. John Herbst is just, I think it was published today, published an op-ed about it. So we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But
well, I think it's really important, Bob, that your members have helped to focus attention on this and get the administration's attention. Don't forget, there are only so many people that work in a White House in any administration, and they have just been completely involved in passing the infrastructure legislation for our country. So I think that perhaps this is one that wasn't on the minds of people at the highest levels in the White House while we were involved in all those other discussions, which were so difficult, needlessly difficult to pass. And but I think they're paying attention now.
well, it does seem like the administration, is very active in relation to the Russian aggression, however you want to define it right now, with trying to work with our NATO allies and others to try and come up with a collective and united response. It's always tough. Putin is always pushing from every different direction. We have one of our panels was headed by General Breedlove, and he is always he teaches a course at Georgia Tech, and he uses his dime theory. You have to use the dime approach: diplomacy, information, military, and economic. No one of them will work, and you got to use them all in a combined way. And he was talking about that a little earlier on the last panel.
I think we have to, by the way, Bob, I think we have to recognize that within Europe itself, Putin very much is about creating divisions. And what makes this particular situation with Nord Stream 2 so difficult, and I know your listeners understand this, but because the pipeline was partly achieved through the intervention of a former chancellor of Germany, Germany is our closest ally in NATO, the largest and most significant, and there are cross purposes here with other European countries, and Germany creates quite a threshold of discontinuity when she does something like this. And I'm very pro-Germany, and but with Merkel retiring, Angela Merkel retiring, I think the politics of Germany is unknown. What's going to happen next, and how's this all going to work out? And there's deep worry among many leaders in Europe as to whether this transatlantic alliance and European Union and NATO can hold together. So there's just a lot of cross purposes and cross feelings going on, even in the ambassadorial community. So we have to respect the Europeans and hope that they can reach an accommodation here. And also work with us to become energy independent across that entire continent and not be dependent.
No, absolutely. And it's the fact that Germany is going through this change adds to the uniqueness, if you will, of what Putin is doing at this particular time.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure you should use the word instability, but unpredictability maybe is a better word there. In Congress, have you seen a developing consensus on what we, the United States, should be doing vis-a-vis, in addition to what the Biden administration, vis-a-vis Russia's current aggression?
A consensus in the Congress?
Yeah.
I think the way in which one views the Congress, if you just look at the increasing amount of funding that's been provided for military assistance to our allies, to our institutions of common purpose on the security front, on the diplomatic front, they have been increasing. If you look at soft programs like the Peace Corps, for example, all those accounts have been plussed up. There is, for Ukraine, I'm speaking about, as well as many of the institutions that function in Europe. We have a president who is very committed to our allies in Europe, our closest allies. So, and Congress has been agreeing with that. We've even exceeded what the administration has asked for in almost every account. So I don't think that there isn't a lack of will here, but I do think that the world is dealing with some of these forces that are so destructive that, take cyber, for example. We haven't fully figured out how to counter them. And so I think we're all working at that. And so there's a little bit of unsteadiness to the period in which we're living. And but I think in terms of Ukraine, from the congressional standpoint, I mean, there have been increases, bipartisan increases, total support for Ukraine, and frankly for the European Union, for our allies in Europe.
You know, you hear this, I hear this, we all probably hear, you know, there's a division of how far you push back against Putin. You don't want to, you know, cross a line and have him be more aggressive and so forth. So there's a view that you've got to balance all this. It was very, very interesting. I'd read it earlier, but Ian Brzezinski in an earlier panel brought up the fact that the Carter administration, when the Kremlin was going to move very significantly, I mean, he has all the numbers and so forth against Poland, the pushback was dramatic that the Carter administration, and of course his father, developed, and the Kremlin backed down. There's a lesson there. Maybe I will send Nick the paper that Ian wrote on that, because it's very interesting, and I remembered a little bit of it, but I sure didn't remember it as clearly as Ian presented it. Hello, Nadia.
Hello. Well, hello, Marcy. So good to see you.
Good to see you too, Nadia. Really great to see you.
Well, your comments about, you know, what we're seeing, there's nothing new. You know, it's history, unfortunately, repeats it often. I just also wanted to say that my very first remembrance of you was you testifying on behalf of a resolution to establish the commission regarding the famine Holodomor. And you have not stopped since working on behalf. You know, I think at one point I introduced you, and Robert mentioned about, you know, how you serve your constituency. And I've said, I think you also serve your constituency in the people of Ukraine. You have been so steadfast, and I also just would like to again say, and I think I've said it in several places, that your steadfast leadership of the caucus has really blossomed. And I know it's been a tough, tough sledding, so to speak. It was, like I say, very impressive. And again, grateful that you invited Robert and I to the meeting that you had with President Zelensky and his delegation. And to see the kind of response you had gotten from your colleagues, right? Congress was not in session, and you had, I guess, 7 members, and the kind of engagement that we saw in the discussions. For me, it was really encouraging because, again, it was not, members had been to Ukraine, and I often, I don't know if you'll remember this, but I do cite it that I remember when Yulia Tymoshenko came to Washington when she was prime minister,
Yeah.
and you organized a meeting for the caucus, and Congressman Levin was the only one who showed up. So but you have kept on, and I think bearing a lot of fruit to your longtime efforts. And again, Robert has said, and Nick has been so important, not only I'm sure to the work that you're doing, but really to the work that you're trying to do with the caucus. And I just wanted to recognize that and let our audience know that it's been a lot of work, and you keep going, 24/7, and you are the Energizer Bunny. And also, you always make time for these various delegations. And I just wanted also to say, in that meeting with President Zelensky, when you asked him what kind of assistance needed, he mentioned veterans, the need for veterans. And we are working with Open World to have a major event in February to deal with veterans issues, so conference. So again, including that as part of our effort to support your efforts and what the administration is doing within the strategic partnership. So again, thank you so very, very much. So
Thank you,
We do
Nadia.
have a,
On that issue of veterans, we did present the books that were translated by the Ukrainian American Medical Association to him. We presented
Right.
him 2 volumes. And I said, Mr. President, look at these. Our impression is that we could print more of these. And he needs to ask our government to do that, or he has to find another source of support. But we know there are doctors in Ukraine that need that material. So I just mentioned that as one bit of unfinished business. And I can't thank Dr. Bogdan Pichurko, who I believe is just retiring from Cleveland Clinic, for his astounding leadership efforts in that arena. But I think what is in those volumes is just very important. One, I think, was more on medical care, but the other one, veterans medical care. It's important that you remember that, be aware of that, and help us get those copied in I don't know how many volumes they can use, but whatever the number is, my goodness, based on the assistance we've set aside, should be used to print more copies.
one thing on that general issue, and then we have a question and a comment. On that general issues, subsequent to the meeting with President Zelensky and the caucus and getting started on the veterans issues, and including the group that came in and met with you, there was Nadia, is Sergey, what's his last name?
Aliyev, I think.
A journalist who was arrested on the eastern front of Ukraine, imprisoned for several years in what it's nothing more than a gulag. It's a torture prison. And he got out, and he got what he described as special treatment because there was so much notoriety. But he made the point in a presentation here in Washington that the prisoners who get out on prisoner exchanges or otherwise, the Ukrainian government gives them a couple weeks of medical tests and so forth, in housing, and then they're on their own. We firmly believe that they should be getting at least the same kind of assistance as the veterans do. I mean, these people are going through shock therapy and every other kind of torture so that they will sign confessions for things they haven't done. So I just add that's one thing we're working on in connection with.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me, I'm gonna read a comment before I go to a question. It's from your former colleague, Congressman Bob Schaefer.
Oh, Bob.
Well said, Nadia. I remain a longstanding fan of Representative Kaptur. I don't miss much about Washington, but I miss working with Marcy through the Ukrainian caucus. It was a highlight.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Thank you. I miss you too. I still remember our journey to Ukraine and meeting with the Cardinal, and oh, it was so beautiful. What a great man he was.
Well, I add to this, I mean, because election year is coming up next year, Bob Schaefer is a Republican, and that was his comment. We have a question. Hi, Congresswoman Kaptur. Thanks so much for doing this. The current White House position is that Nord Stream's sanctions don't actually deter Russian aggression toward Ukraine. They threaten transatlantic unity, and that Republicans are just using the issue to score cheap domestic political points. Can I get your response on that?
All right, well, I guess you could say that, but if you look at the what happened here in the Congress, there has been consistent opposition to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline on both sides of the aisle. And we have encouraged administrations to impose sanctions on those who are constructing the pipeline, on those who are involved in it. And this has gone over several years. So this is nothing new. In addition to that, just so you are aware, I'm sure you are, but we've worked very hard to try to create another pathway through Central Europe for energy. And that's called the 3 Seas Initiative. And we are hopeful that that can have some added buoyancy as we move forward. Russia is amassing troops, and their invasion of Ukraine and the loss of life and all of the issues that Ukraine is dealing with are just so painful. But I don't think that at least in the Congress, I can't control every White House or the Supreme Court, but at least in the Congress, we've had very, very strong bipartisan support to place sanctions on those who benefit from that pipeline. So I feel we've done our job, and the executive branch has to speak for itself. I think we're influencing them. You know, as Washington goes, it takes a while sometimes to get a message to be heard, message get through. One of the disadvantages we are having at the current moment is that many of our ambassadorial appointments have not been confirmed by the Senate. And so you have several countries in Europe and other places where our ambassador is not in place. And so this is making it more difficult to get information. And so in some ways you might say part of the stall is simply because the Senate, I'm in the House, so you know there's this constant rivalry with the Senate, but nonetheless, they ought to do their job. And they ought to make these appointments for the security of our country and to get these individuals in place. They're really, to delay those appointments makes no sense.
Well, you know, that came up before. I made the comment that, and you know, Michael Carpenter, and he's exceptional, and he was a member of our Freedom of Friends of Ukraine network. He was confirmed now, and last Saturday he flew off to Switzerland to be ambassador to OSCE, and I'm anxious to get him there because he is such a strong expert and advocate for Ukraine, and has a very realistic view of Russia. One thing about ambassadors, you know,
yes,
that is troubling is we have a strategic partnership with Ukraine. I mean, we filled out all these documents. We've got the schedule of things to be worked on, And we haven't even gotten a nominee to be ambassador to Ukraine. That's got to be done. That post needs to be filled. And I personally, this is me personally, I think it needs to be somebody strong and close to the president, somebody who can talk to the president directly.
I agree with that. As you might know, Secretary Granholm was dispatched by the administration to go to Ukraine to meet with officials there and to look at the energy issue in particular. And of course, to me, energy is security. And the lack thereof, the results of that are pretty evident in the history of our own country, in the history of other countries, and certainly with what Ukraine is facing now. So that was a secretary level person that went on behalf of the administration. She's respected inside. And I know how much the president cares because I traveled with him there in 2014 after Russia first invaded on the Eastern Front. And I have to tell you, President Biden was warmly received in the Rada. I still remember that moment. I thought, wow. And the people of Ukraine, the way they applauded as we walked through the streets, I thought, wow. They knew he was vice president. They knew that he was there, and he made that effort. And so I know what's in his heart. Now we have to make sure that the administration, the right people are in place, and that he's able to get good advice and to help us make some of these difficult choices. I think this issue of sanctions is a really complicated one because of European politics. But I have hope that he'll find a way to achieve the results that we need.
Well, you know, it came up a little bit earlier and you responded to it about Congress being unified. You know, the fact of the matter, whether it's this administration or bipartisan going back any administration, there have been differing views within the administrations about how to deal with Ukraine. That's a fact. And there are differing views on Capitol Hill, but the bottom line in relation to Congress is Congress has always, going back 100 years, bipartisan support for Ukraine. And that's just a fact. And I've often told people, both in Ukraine and here, that if you want to work on Ukrainian policy, yes, the administration is critical. They set foreign policy, but they're influenced by Congress, and Congress is key to supporting Ukraine.
That is very true. I'll tell you, when I got here and Nadia was kind to mention the Holodomor resolution, I didn't know that that had never been done. When we actually did the research and we had to literally lift our own government up to reveal certain documents that had been sequestered since World War II, I was one of the most surprised people in the world because I knew from the history of my own family and the history of many families, many American families that I have met, what the fate of their relatives really were. And so I guess that was my baptism into understanding how ragged the history was. We confronted in that part of the world and our government's willingness to admit what had happened. The same was true, by the way, for the revelations related to Katyn Forest inside of now the Soviet Union, now near Smolensk, right? And that the documents related to that had not been released by our government a half a century after the close of the war. So we have some truth telling to do. And that was a road I didn't even know when I was first elected that I would go down. And the Ukrainian American community helped me. They asked me questions and we worked on that together, but I was just, it's sort of like also when I was first elected, we created the bill that built the World War II memorial. It only took us 17 years, but there wasn't a World War II memorial in the nation's capital. So there were these big omissions, right? And when you really think, oh my goodness, how is this even possible? And you get involved as a member because you see that there is historical truth that needs to be told and to be remembered and to be taught. And so some of the roads that we've gone down, when I was first elected, believe me, those projects were not in my speeches. But once you get elected and you start meeting people and you begin to hear about situations, you move those into the legislative process. And that's why I love the Congress, because I like to believe, and I know that the House is the closest to the people.
And Marcy, along those lines, just also mention your work with the Victims of Communism Foundation. I know that's something that you're very engaged with. And this past Monday, or a week ago, excuse me, we had a event regarding the Holodomor. Andrea Chalupa talked about the Mr. Jones film, and then about the petition to rescind the Pulitzer Prize. And just by happenstance, Don Ritter joined the discussion. And so he talked about the efforts that the Victims of Communism Foundation is also engaged in regards to Ukraine. And I know that you're a very key, important member of that effort.
I am. Thank you for bringing that organization up, Nadia. Thank you for helping them.
So, well, they're helping us. They're going to be, Don had just come back from a trip to Kyiv. They came back, on the 11th or something of November, and the purpose of the trip was to work with the Ukrainians about this whole rescinding of the Pulitzer Prize from Durante. I think we've probably
We have one more question.
Okay.
Or actually, we have two. Putin's administration announced a possible phone call between Biden and Putin. Are there any signals from the Biden administration about that you're aware of?
Gosh, I read the same press report that you did. And I imagine that the president is preparing for that. And I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And the other is not a question. It's a thank you from Tamara. Thank you, Congresswoman Kaptur, for promoting continued American support of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people as a rightful independent nation in the community of nations of the world. I think her sentiment is kind of a good way to end this. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for all the work that you do, and know that we'll be back to ask you for more help.
Well, I'll tell you, I couldn't think of two Americans who have fought harder for liberty in Ukraine than the two of you. It is just such a joy to know you both, really, and to appreciate your work and also your humor, because we need that too.
You need humor.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you.
And all the best to your staff.
Yes.
Very helpful.